Welcome back to another episode of LEO Radio. Joey Sperlazza, joined with Collin Congleton, and we're going to continue our leadership series where we've been discussing the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Today we're going to be discussing leading up and down the chain of command. And I think we both agree that what you'll see is that this ties in very nicely with everything that we've talked about thus far. And a lot of this has to do with the culture that's already been established within your department. The more that this culture encompasses the welcoming of feedback, the better it's going to be for the entire organization. So our first talking point: it is paramount that senior leaders explain to their junior leaders and troops executing the mission how their role contributes to big picture success.
Yeah, so with this first section, down the chain, this is what I think a lot of people typically think of when they think about leadership, right? Is leading those subordinates under your command. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. There's nothing really too novel here, and for those that have watched the previous episodes, a lot of the earlier material is starting to tie in here. So it's pretty straightforward. But here, as we've discussed previously, it's critical that people know and understand not just their role and what it is you expect of them, but how that fits into the bigger picture, right? That's going to be critical to overall mission success. And one of the things very specific to law enforcement, you have a lot of your people are going to be operating with a good deal of autonomy, right? Like once they turn out from roll call and hit the road or go to that assignment, whatever the case may be, they're kind of their own boss. If you're not going to be right there standing over them, watching them, they need to understand how they fit into that bigger picture, so that when you're not, hopefully not micromanaging, they know what needs to be done.
A lot of this comes with experience too, but especially if you have a junior leader and you have somebody that is new to the role, we're expected to know policies that are thousands of pages in length. And within each policy, there's specific supervisor responsibilities. However, knowing what policies you really need to hone in on is something that should be done early in a junior leader's career. That's where the advantage of a lieutenant or someone from the command staff sitting down with that sergeant saying, listen, you're responsible for a lot, but these are the things I want you to hone in on. The more that you can get them to be independent in those types of calls, the more that they're going to self-develop and grow. But by having that conversation early, it shows them exactly where they fall into that piece of the puzzle. And a lot of this has to do with empowerment, which we've talked significantly about. Also, having the wherewithal as a lieutenant or a commanding officer responding to a scene and letting that sergeant who's been running a scene that's maybe not as critical, letting them run with it from beginning to end. You're there to supervise and monitor rather than to show up and take over as an incident commander. I think that that's such a big, important piece of development, and it helps that sergeant, that junior leader, understand exactly where they fit into the organization. The more that you're able to convey that via conversation, and then the less important scenes, when there's a larger unfolding scene, that sergeant isn't going to have to think as much about it, and they're going to be able to come in, place themselves exactly where they need to be. When you arrive, they know what facts and pointers that they have to give you to be able to brief you on. It's going to make your job as the senior leader a lot easier when you have that type of a conversation.
Yeah, one of the things too, you're touching on knowing what policies you have to really pay attention to and stuff like that. One of the things that I like to look at, uh, you can maybe we can post up an illustration of this. I'll send it to you. But the concept, you'll see it illustrated usually in like a graph where they whack it up into quadrants. Um, High frequency, low risk incidents, right?
Mhm.
Things that are happening all the time that you need to know because you're going to deal with it on a regular basis. And it's not necessarily a critical incident type thing, right? It's a somewhat low or even to moderate risk, um, in terms of what would be the consequences if you're not familiar with the policy, or if you make a mistake, you get something wrong, right? Not anything huge, not the end of the world, right? Versus those low frequency but very high risk incidents. And we were just talking about officer involved shootings and responding to that as a supervisor. That's one of those things that hopefully you're not going to deal with on a regular basis, but when you do, you really got to know what you're doing. You got to be familiar with the policies, what's required, what's expected, um, because the stakes are very high there, right? And so that's just, it's something I've found to be helpful over the years, is thinking in those terms. What's the high frequency low risk, and what's the low frequency high risk that I really want to focus on.
Yeah, and just like you said with the officer involved shootings, the more that you get that command mentality and understanding, a lot of what we've been talking about thus far is the participatory leadership, right? We're soliciting information from our troops. We're doing a lot to develop them, but there's times, such as an officer involved shooting, possibly an active shooter, possibly a rapidly evolving crime scene, where you're not going to have that participatory leadership, and you need to be an autocrat because the situation dictates such. And having those junior leaders taking that role early in that leadership career, even as an officer prior to becoming promoted, is important in their development, and it's going to help them when they do get that low frequency, high risk or high catastrophe, even especially once you factor in these school shootings, right? And understanding that with an active shooter, with potentially a terrorist attack, once the violence stops, that incident is far from over. There's going to be days of investigation that go into it. So
Yeah.
having that wherewithal to start thinking into the future early in an incident rather than waiting for somebody from above you to start thinking about relief, thinking about the investigatory process, thinking about crime scene preservation. The earlier that you get them thinking about that at a smaller scene, when they have that big scene, that'll translate really nicely. Right.
Yeah,
Let's move on
that's
to
a that's a good, yeah, good
the
time to the next point there.
Yeah. This understanding helps the team members prioritize their efforts in a rapidly changing, dynamic environment. That is leading down the chain of command. It requires regularly stepping out of the office and personally engaging in face to face conversations with direct reports and observing the frontline troops in action to understand their particular challenges and read them into the commander's intent. This goes right into what we were talking about with the General Mattis example, being out there talking to that Lance Corporal in a foxhole, being out there talking to that officer that's fresh off of FTO, making sure that they know what their actual mission is. You're in a school zone when school dismissal is happening. Why are you there? You're not there to write parking tickets per se. You might be there to address speeding. You may not be there to address motor vehicle at all. You might be there for scene security to deter a violent event from happening. But telling an officer to stand in one place is a lot different than them understanding the why, understanding what is the purpose that you're there. And by being on that front line and interacting with them and being personable with them, you get that feedback from them. It's so critically important.
Yeah, there's a few things in here that I think are really, really critical for anybody in a leadership role. You know, first off, rapidly changing dynamic environment. I mean, that is our job, right? I mean, day in, day out, we're dealing with rapidly changing dynamic environments. So this lends very well to our profession. Um, Also, that face-to-face engagement. I mean, like you said, Mattis, great example. You know, if you're a chief, or even a captain of patrol, something like that, right? And you haven't humped a radio car, you haven't gone out and actually done patrol in 5 years, 10 years. You got to get out there, man. You got to meet your troops out there on the road, see what they're getting involved in. This job has changed immensely over the last couple of years, never mind the last 10 years, right? If your experience is stale, how effective can you really be? How well do you really understand what your guys are dealing with out there, and in turn what their needs are, right? Going back to that idea of servant leadership that we've discussed several times in previous episodes, your job as a leader is to take care of your people and make sure that they have what they need in terms of training and equipment and support. how can you really understand that? Obviously, you got to listen to your folks, but if you're not going out there and engaging with them face to face when they're out there doing the job, you have to get down to their level, get out there with them, show up occasionally for a midnight tour. I mean, aside from anything else, think about the effect on morale, and not to throw stones or anything, but I'm not talking about the recent chief in the news showing up to a DUI call. I'm not talking about that kind of show up for a midnight tour, right? I'm talking about, hey, show up for a roll call. Maybe cruise through, back your guys up on a car stop or something. Shift your schedule every now and then. Doesn't have to be all the time, but be seen by your folks that don't work Monday through Friday on day tour.
Mhm. And going to the roll call example, especially if you have something that you want to push down, majority of the time it could be pushed down through the patrol lieutenant or sergeant at roll call via email. But it also gets a lot different when it's you delivering that message to a frontline officer as a commanding officer, number one. Afterwards, if you're hanging around after roll call, it might not be every officer, but you're more likely to get actual feedback or actual questions. I like to get those actual questions in that group setting, because sometimes the person that asked a question, somebody else might be thinking the same thing, or they didn't think about that yet. So now you're having an actual dialogue back and forth. And it also makes you a lot more approachable. Let's say that what's being pushed down is something that's a little bit different. You being there to be the face of the message, it makes it a lot more likely that you're going to get accurate feedback from the officers that you're actually trying to give this direction to. It shows that you care. It shows that you're not just checking a box. You're not telling them to do something because this is what we have to do to save face because of whatever incident is happening. It's to show that you actually care. So it all ties into to make sure that you're opening up communication. And the more that you have open communication going down, the more likely you are to get that feedback coming back up. Because if you are that
Yeah.
typical autocrat and if you are that person that's not approachable, it's going to be very difficult for you to get accurate feedback from the officers that are on the front line. And how do you adjust your plan and how do we move forward as a profession if you're not getting feedback from the troops that are on the front line that are executing your plan, right?
Yeah, 100%. And one other thing too with that, just a practical point, I guess. Um, for those of you that work in smaller to moderate sized agencies where you have one station house, right? It's so easy to do this, and if you have two 12-hour tours, or maybe you got three shifts, whatever, how hard is it to get that FaceTime with all your guys? It's pretty simple.
Sometimes the
If
hardest part is checking the ego, going back to
Yeah,
what we talked about
yeah,
earlier, right?
and
Like,
for those
removing
guys,
yourself from that chair, removing yourself from the rank to be there for the brand new
yeah,
officer.
yeah, yeah. For those guys like myself that are in larger agencies, we got four precincts, three shifts, plus our other specialized units, street crimes and ESU and so on. Uh, to get to all those roll calls is tough, right? Doesn't mean you can't do it. And your point about delivering messages personally, that's huge, especially when it comes to things like policy changes, procedural changes. If you don't want the guys just rolling their eyes and saying, "Oh, here more nonsense from the Puzzle Palace," right? And you actually go there and explain, "Hey guys, listen, this is what we're doing. This is the why, right? This is why it should matter to you. And hey, we're putting this in place because it's going to help all of us. And here's how. And here's your role, and getting the commander's intent, all that kind of stuff. That goes infinitely further than some email or a power DMS post, right? Now, what you can do with this, again, maybe you can't get to every single roll call in a larger agency, but you go to one or two, and when you've refined that message, now you record it and you put that out to the others that you couldn't get to face, right? They're able to maybe not participate in the conversation, but they're getting the information in a much more personal way than that email or that memo or whatever. And they get the benefit of the questions and conversations that you're having with those people that you are face to face with. And then you simply rotate that. Hey, last month, I hit the West and the South districts. So next time something comes out, I'm going to go to the North and the East, right? And you're moving around. And now you're over time, you're getting that FaceTime with everybody, and everybody's able to benefit from those conversations. And it's so simple to do now with technology. You have somebody, record with a cell phone, and you can throw it up on whatever platform your agency's using, and there you go.
We've even done it. We use Teams at work, but whether it's Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, there's other ways that you could solicit feedback from people. Even if it's you control it to maybe one or two precincts that are going to be giving you the feed questions via chat. Being able to even say, hey, we're gonna have a 30-minute Zoom meeting regarding the new use of force policy. We want people to come to us with some questions, and if it's successful, if there's more in the future, we'll have more Zoom meetings that we can continue the conversation. But I would definitely do that to a defined period of time, and it's something that we're a larger agency and we're statewide. So for us to be able to contact people that are Camden, Atlantic City, Newark, Hoboken, Secaucus at the same time, that's phenomenal. And it would be foolish for us not to do stuff like that to be able to improve our communication with the frontline officers. And I just think that it's important that the more you open that communication, the more likely you are to solicit real valued feedback for some of the more difficult of the conversations that have to be had.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. And the last point for going down the chain, as a leader employing extreme ownership, if your team isn't doing what you need them to do, you first have to look at yourself. And goes right into what we just talked about. Again, if you aren't giving that clear mission, if the officers don't understand what your mission is, whose fault is that? Is it the brand new officer who's inexperienced and afraid to ask you a question? Or is it your fault because you gave poor orders? You weren't clear. Maybe you didn't show exactly what steps had to be done to accomplish whatever the mission at hand is.
Yeah, this really is the whole book in a nutshell. This is extreme ownership distilled down to its purest form. Whenever there's an issue, you as a leader, you look first to yourself. Where have I failed? Where and how could I have done better? Uh, taking and to be clear, this doesn't mean you have to beat yourself up all the time, but understand your responsibility and as a leader, nobody is going to respect or really want to work with somebody who's always pointing the finger. You should be looking at yourself and really taking stock. Where did I go wrong? Where could I have improved? Where could I have done better, and so on. And then the flip side of that, of course, is while we're always as good leaders, we're going to take the blame. We have to always give the credit. Give whether that's up or down the chain. Give the credit.
Yep, and especially when it comes to what you were just talking about with commanders coming out and dressing their frontline troops. If you see something that is an easily overlooked job or easily overlooked arrest that maybe is worth not really an award, but worth a conversation, coming out to that next roll call or within a reasonable amount of time, coming out there and addressing that officer in that roll call, giving them that public praise, saying, hey, like, listen, we've made several burglary arrests, but the one that you have, you actually were able to get this guy who maybe never was fingerprinted before. And now we're connecting him to other jobs, but showing that frontline officer that their work, their due diligence is what was able to close out a series of burglaries, just as one example. But again, it's not necessarily something you're going to get a citation bar above your badge for, but it's something where you get some of that public praise. You get a lot more buy-in from officers when you do that, and you get them to be a lot more emotionally invested in the work that we do. And especially because we don't get bonuses, we don't get any type of financial incentives. What you have to do as a leader is you have to get that intrinsic motivation because there's not a lot of external motivation that we can give officers. And especially in smaller agencies where you don't have an ESU, a street crimes, you might not have the manpower to be able to put people on loan to the prosecutor's office or DEA. for those officers, like how do you keep them emotionally vested? Like what makes them want to come to work and do good work every day? It's little things like that that make them want to do their
Yeah,
job.
you make a great point there, and the thing with that too is it doesn't have to cost anything. It's so easy to do. In my agency, um, and without getting into all the whys and everything, we haven't had an awards program or an awards ceremony in something like 10 years now. They just stopped doing it, right? So nobody gets awards anymore. We have one captain, was was the captain in charge of the South Precinct for a while. He's now deputy chief. When he was running that precinct, he would come in on every tour, uh, days, evenings, midnights, and just like you're talking about, if there was an incident and he wanted to recognize some guys, he had a box of certificate paper that he got at Staples. He would print something out, with their name and whatever, and maybe the file number from the incident, and come to roll call and say, "Hey, I want to recognize these guys for doing a great job. Give them a certificate, Officer of the Month or whatever, Commander's Appreciation, whatever it was." And it cost some, pennies to do that, right? But those cops really appreciated that. And not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but one of the challenges that we know leadership is facing in our profession and in many professions, I think now, is dealing with some of the there's there's some generational issues, we'll say, right? And this younger generation, how to motivate them, what do they value, things like that. Yeah, we know from their, I guess you could say, proclivity for social media and whatnot, they enjoy being recognized for, for whatever, but in this case, for a job well done. It goes a long way. And it's, again, it's so easy to do.
In our department, we have Facebook, Instagram, and when there are jobs that come through that are of notoriety, not necessarily award worthy, but a good job, they our department usually posts up a picture of the officers, a brief synopsis of the incident. If that's not something that your department is doing, it's something again zero cost except for taking a picture and having the time to make a Facebook post, but especially for the younger officers that are new into this profession, that means a lot. But as long as you don't dilute the water, you don't want it to be that you're doing every job. You want to make sure that you're highlighting the key jobs. So,
Yeah.
anything else on down the chain before we move to up the chain?
No, keep it moving.
All right. So now for leading up the chain of command, do not blame the boss. First, blame yourself. Examine what you can do better to convey critical information for decisions to be made and support allocated. And it's the opposite of what we just talked about down the chain, but they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, and ties directly into ensuring that you have extreme ownership of everything that you put your hands on.
Yeah, this one, I gotta say, when I first read this book, this really jumped out at me. It was a concept I was not familiar with prior to the book. The idea of leading up the chain, and I really liked it. And I think a lot of us, especially in law enforcement, have dealt with bosses where, we'll say you have some frustration, perhaps. Um, it's really easy to fall into that trap of, finger pointing, as we were just talking about. Here again, the core principle of extreme ownership, taking ownership of everything in your world, in your sphere, and really examining what could I be doing better, right? Um, a lot of times, we want to point the finger at the boss, and we're not, maybe we don't understand their position because we haven't done their job. We don't know all the different things that they're dealing with, and so on and so forth. And just one, really simple example of this, looking to yourself first before you complain and point the finger. I was having some communication issues with somebody up my chain of command, um, and wanting to get frustrated over that. Uh, and it was a simple thing. Am I really doing everything that I can do on my end to effectively communicate with this guy? Maybe an email isn't the best way to go. And then I started really thinking about it. I'm going, this guy in his position is probably getting dozens, if not hundreds of emails a day. And how, just because something is important to me doesn't mean it's important to him. How hard is it for me to walk down the hall, if it really is important, and say, "Hey, boss, I just sent you an email. Just wanted to give you a heads up. It's about this. It's important. Make sure at your leisure you get a look at that. Don't let it slip through the cracks." Takes 5 minutes, and it's problem solved. And now I can genuinely say, okay, I'm doing everything I can do to make sure that we're communicating effectively.
Mhm.
It's that easy.
And one of the things too, with respect to this, is if you're the sergeant, lieutenant, whatever, handling roll call, giving an order out to your troops that you don't necessarily agree with, it's a lot better received from the officers if you have that conversation with them, you're soliciting their concerns, their feedback, and then understanding and making sure that they understand this is an order coming down. We have to do it. Though it may on its surface seem like it's not going to be the best post, best assignment, best, etc. It's something that we have to accomplish because at the end of the day, you have to have that rudder tap to where you say, we're here to serve the community. We're being paid to do our 10, 8, 12-hour shift, whatever it is that your department works. But this is what needs to be done. If the way that we're executing this mission needs to be adjusted for the future, we will do that. But we need to start with this. The more that you give me feedback, the more that I can give feedback up the chain of command about ways that we could potentially do this better. Um, and also actually being out there with them and helping them to do whatever the task or assignment is. If you're sitting there and complaining about your captain, complaining about what needs to be done, and then telling the officers, this sucks, but you're going to do it, and I'm going to go do whatever I want to do because I'm the sergeant or lieutenant, that's not going to be well received. And that's going to create a culture of dissent and a culture of people not really wanting to come to work. Maybe you'll see an increase in sick time usage. You'll see people not happy when they're coming to work. I'm not saying that they're going to be happy, but it'll be better received when it's a conversation. And again, it's not sitting there to be the company guy and sipping on the Kool-Aid and, being that guy, but it is to be like, hey, let's look at the totality of this. Why are we doing it? And have that conversation. But if you're just throwing your boss under the bus and you're sitting there and bad mouthing your department, at the end of the day, it's going to get done because it's a lawful order. So, like, if you're the officer, wouldn't you rather do it with a little bit of positive spin on it? Or would you rather be like, this sucks, this sucks. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. You're going to do it. So, at least try to get them to be engaged. And it might not, you might fail in that, but that to me, I've done it personally. That to me has been what's been the effective way to sell down something that I didn't necessarily think was the best way to do it. But you still have to do it. We have to do whatever it is that we're ordered to do. Right.
This this point actually ties in really well with the next two sections. I'm just going to link them together if you don't mind.
No,
So,
please.
first point is leading up the chain of command requires tactful engagement with the immediate boss to obtain the decisions and support necessary to enable your team to accomplish its mission and ultimately win. Key thing there, tactful engagement. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then the second point, leading up the chain takes much more savvy and skill than leading down the chain. Leading up, the leader cannot fall back on his or her positional authority. Instead, the subordinate leader must use influence, experience, knowledge, communication, and maintain the highest professionalism. So exactly what you're talking about, you can't rely on because I said so or because I'm the lieutenant, right? When you're going up the chain, that doesn't work, So the the two things here again, tactful engagement, right? Being able to effectively communicate and give pushback, give that honest feedback. Hey, sir, I'm getting some grumblings from the guys. Here's some concerns. This is something I need to convey to you. Maybe we need to make an adjustment here, whatever. But understanding how to bring those things up tactfully, respectfully, so that you're not going to shut down communication before it starts. You're not going to trigger, somebody's ego or defensive, posture, whatever the case may be. And a big thing with this, again, because you can't fall back on your rank, to put it very simply and perhaps bluntly, just know your shit. If all everything they're talking about here, professionalism, knowledge, experience, if you're regarded as somebody who knows their shit, you're going to be looked to and respected by your superiors and subordinates alike, and those superiors are going to come to depend on you, because they value your input because you know your shit, right? So staying on top of professional development, education, knowing the law, knowing the policies, being sharp on tactics, whatever it is, and being able to communicate this stuff effectively, that's going to go such a long way. It's going to put you in a great position where, again, your superiors are going to value that input. They're going to seek it out. And when you have to go to them with something and you're trying to lead up the chain, they're going to be much more receptive.
Yep. And especially when it comes to, like you said, with the tactful engagement, the more that you are going to your commanding officer and expressing objective concerns or criticisms to the plan, rather than simply being able to say, I don't agree with this. No one's going to want to do this. This isn't going to help. We've done this before. It never worked before. But if you could show this didn't work before, however, when we had a similar issue, we approached it by doing A, B, C, and the officers enjoy doing A, B, and C, and we've had positive feedback, and we also accomplished the same end state. So it's like, what's our mission? What's the end state? What are the objective goals that we've set to reach that final goal of remediating whatever the issue is? If you could show them this plan, though it could work, we have another plan that could work better. And that's that tactful engagement and being able to
Yeah.
sell up the chain of command. But you have to be respected to be even in that position, just exactly what you said. And the more that you give that positive feedback and you're not viewed as a complainer, you're not viewed as someone that's going to be insubordinate for no reason. Like they're going to actually sit there and listen. Sometimes, maybe they won't, but at the very least, I hope a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast are the people who want to be the leaders in their department. Even if you can't accomplish this now in your department, maybe the person that's above you, all they do is act as an autocrat and use their position to get things done. When you're in that seat, don't make the same mistakes. Make sure that you're doing the things that we're talking about. Make sure you solicit that feedback. And it's very frustrating when you have somebody who gets frustrated with the way things were done in the past, and then they're in that seat, they have the opportunity to change. Instead of changing and pushing into the future, they wind up making the same mistakes. If you can't push up the chain and get things done, put that in your heart, put that in the back of your mind, and know when you're in the seat, you're going to be the one that makes a difference. You're going to be the one that pushes your department in the future because it's important. You can't keep making the same mistakes, especially if you're one that complains about those mistakes.
Yeah. A couple of things too I just want to throw on top of this because I think they're really important, and some things that I'll even say I kind of learned the hard way, right? Um, as we've discussed previously, this stuff, this aspect of leadership starts way before the day that you're trying to put it into practice, right? Being able to tactfully and professionally communicate with somebody and all the things that we're talking about in this section, right? That all starts really way before you go to have that conversation, way before you go knock on that door. So take care of how you build and foster relationships in your agency and even outside of your agency with other professionals in your area. Um, be mindful that you don't know who's going to promote up and end up in a position in your chain of command above you or below you, um, over the years. And so it's important, you don't have to like everybody. You don't have to hang out with everybody outside of work, but you got to be able to have a good professional working relationship with everybody. So keep that in mind. If you aspire to be a leader or if you are in a leadership position, that's a really critical piece of this whole puzzle, right? And then what goes hand in hand with that, you know, I I used to say, like, you can't fault the lance corporal for not behaving like a general, right? However, uh, in this profession, you know, keep in mind that reputations, good or bad, can settle in very quickly and be very, very hard to change. So, if you are one of the maybe one of the younger officers listening to this, and you aspire to be in a leadership role someday, you know, keep this in mind. You don't want to wait until you put those stripes on to start acting like a sergeant and start acting like a professional. Um, by that time, it might be too late. You might be regarded as somebody who's a goof off or, unprofessional or whatever the case, I don't need to know that because I can just call the sergeant. Well, be that guy that other people can depend on to know the right answer, have the right answer, so that when you put those sergeant stripes on, you already have that level of respect from your superiors and subordinates alike. Again, this stuff all starts way before you go knock on that door.
Yep, and they call that pivotal moment from moving from an officer to a leader the critical shift. And you spend a lot of time in developing yourself as an officer. You go from a trainee, going to the police academy, to now being on field training, now being on your own. Even when you're on your own, there's a lot of dependence you have on senior officers and on your sergeant, and then eventually getting to the goal of being completely on your own. Now you get put into that leadership position, formal or informal, and you have a whole new set of skills that you have to develop. And it's going to be a lot harder to develop the trust of your subordinates and all superiors alike if you aren't respected. The earlier that you make that conscious effort to have a pivotal shift to where you move from being a goof off or someone that asks the questions to someone that asks the questions of how to find the answers, and now you're looking for answers on your own. Don't just give me an answer, but give me the tool to research the answer and understanding that. And sometimes it's going to be very difficult for people, but it's not impossible. But it has to be a conscious decision in your mind that you're going to take that ownership of yourself, your own development, and show other people that you're making that effort. The more that you show people that you're having that effort, especially if there's a commanding officer that doesn't particularly like you, it'll start to get that respect developed for you. And it might be more difficult for you to get out of that hole compared to someone who is the aggressive go getter that was friendly with that superior. But it's not an impossible task. And if you write yourself off, you're just doing yourself that discredit. All right, you want to move into that last point of up the chain?
Yeah. So this is a big one. One of the most important jobs of any leader is to support your own boss, your immediate leadership. In any chain of command, the leadership must always present a united front to the troops. A public display of discontent or disagreement with the chain of command undermines the authority of leaders at all levels. This is catastrophic to the performance of any organization. This is true, and here again, I've lived this, and I haven't always gotten it right. There are times when you will disagree uh, with those above you in your chain of command, and decisions that they're making or policy changes, whatever the case may be. We don't complain down the chain. That it's unprofessional and it's cancerous. And if you fall into that trap, it can have, just like they said here, it can have catastrophic effects. You've got to force yourself to have the difficult conversations with the right people at the right time. If you disagree so strongly with something that you're willing to, talk about it to your subordinates, go have the conversation with the right people. If it's that important to you, have that tactful communication up the chain, and try to, influence change there. But don't bitch about it to your subordinates. It's again, it's
I, I
cancerous.
hate I hate hearing that a roll call meeting's turning into a union meeting. And again, knowing your audience, and not to get into too many of the specifics, but to hear a senior leader bad mouthing the department, talking about how bad it is to work here. Like, you have a guy who's brand new into his career that's listening to a senior leader in a department bad mouthing his own department. What hope does that person have? He has so much selfish development that he has to do, that the things that are happening in the department are not even relevant to him at this point in his career. He needs to worry about his own development. And to confuse peers with subordinates is foolish. However, a subordinate can be a peer. I have people that I work with on my squad that are officers that are close personal friends with me. we could have very candid conversations about stuff that I'm not going to have with other officers because we don't have that personal relationship. But again, it's not to be the guy that's drinking the Kool-Aid and just being the company man and trying to do everything positively. It's trying to accomplish what the mission is. And part of my mission is coming to work and enjoying the company that I'm with. If all of us are coming to work and miserable, I'm going to be miserable. I don't want to come to work and be miserable. I want to come in, do my job, and hopefully leave in one tactful piece and mentally sound. If all you're doing is complaining about your leadership and complaining about the department, complaining about the attorney general directives, what are you accomplishing? Especially when
Yeah.
those things are out of your control. Like, did people want that use of force policy to change? Maybe it was long overdue, but I can't control it. So, what are we going to do? We're going to become use of force experts and we're going to learn it all together. Like, it was a very drastic change for us, but we're going to do it together, guys. Like, again, it's not to be the company man and drink the Kool Aid. It's to say, we have to do it. Let's do it the best way possible. So, we're mentally sound.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So, for the major factors to be aware of when leading up and down the chain of command are these: take responsibility for leading everyone in your world, subordinates and superiors alike. I think that's worth talking about, right? How do you
Yeah.
lead a superior officer? What's the way that you lead a superior officer? Again, I think that the biggest thing is your attitude and how you convey that conversation. And understanding that that leadership role is not just for the things that are below you, but also for people that are above you. How do you get a cultural change? How do you get policies to be changed? How do you get things to be reimagined? It's on you. It's on you to convey that up the train. I think it's your attitude that's the biggest difference there.
Yeah, and you know, here again, something that we've talked about over and over and over again throughout this book, checking the ego, right? If if you are genuinely committed to the mission and your people, and you are putting your ego aside, um, I think that you're gonna be much more successful at leading up the chain. And I'll give you an example. Say, and I know this is going to be tough to imagine for anybody in law enforcement, but let's say you got a superior in your chain of command who is not the most motivated guy, maybe even might go so far as to say that they're lazy. And you got something that you want to get accomplished, right? And you can't push this guy to do it. You know, do you need the recognition? Do you need your ego stroked? What is really important? That the thing gets done, that the mission gets accomplished, right? If you have to do everything and hand it over to this person, gift wrapped with a bow on it, so be it. And if they're going to take your work and put their name on it, so that they get recognition, and this happens. I've personally had it happen to me on numerous occasions. At the end of the day, I don't really care whose name is on it. What I care about is that it gets done. So I think that's just one of the ways in which we can lead up the chain, right? But it involves, again, being a professional, checking your ego, and putting the mission and your people first. Um, as long as you're prioritizing those things, I think you're good. And I think too that trying to be the example is, for a lot of folks up the chain, it's going to um, create a sense of accountability, if you will. And I don't know if everybody would agree with me on this, and I'm not saying it's always going to be true with everybody above you in your chain of command, but if you're coming in and setting the standard, exemplifying the standard. I've been told by some superiors that, hey, you are threatening to some people above you in the chain of command. They see you as a threat to their position, right? That's okay, as long as they know that they got to stay on their toes and bring their A game because there's somebody really sharp below them in the chain of command. I think that's a good thing. I think that that's going to push them to perform better. And if they're gunning for me because I'm a threat to them or whatever, so be it. I'm going to keep doing what I do and performing to the best of my ability. And I'm not going to worry about that. But I think that's another way, in practical terms, where we can lead up the chain. Hey, I gotta I gotta really know my stuff, because this guy, he might call me if I show up to that meeting and spew something that's incorrect and expect that everybody's just going to go along with it. He really knows what he's talking about, and he might call that out in a tactful way. But this guy being there means that I have to do better. That's again, just another way that you can lead up the chain. Again, know your shit.
Yep. And it's eventually the people that are faking the funk in those situations, the people that are stealing your work, that are trying to make the work their own. It's only going to last for so long for them. There's no way that they could keep up with that facade, keep up with stealing other people's work and making it look like their own. Maybe they can, but at the very least, the people that matter to you are going to know the work that you've done to get to that point. So it's
Yeah.
uh it's frustrating. I've seen it firsthand as well. I've been on your side of it. It's frustrating, but at the end of the day, I can go to sleep with knowing that my conscience is clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all right, so on to the next point. If someone isn't doing what you want or need them to do, look in the mirror first and determine what you can do to better enable this. Is there anything else that you want to add to what we've already talked about?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and we've been talking about it throughout, right? Like, this again, this is extreme ownership in a nutshell. You point the finger at yourself, look in the mirror. What more can I be doing? If my subordinates are failing, have I not led them? Have I not uh, made clear what is needed, what is expected, what the mission is, so on and so forth? The people above me, have I done everything I can do to help them, to facilitate whatever it is that needs to get done? Am I failing as their subordinate in some way, where if I step that up, it'll fix this? Uh, Everything is gonna start first with you.
And the one thing I will say, and this book is a little altruistic in the sense of perfect world. You have subordinates that have good intent. It's possibly even worth doing a separate episode on dealing with people that are not living up to the standard when you have done everything that you've examined intrinsically. Dealing with insubordination, dealing with people that are purposely not accomplishing the mission, and he doesn't really get into that in this book, but it is an issue in our profession, especially. It's
Yeah,
very difficult to have somebody fired or even demoted out of that leadership position. So understanding the difference of saying, like, I did everything that I could, and now this person's being insubordinate, or this person's performance standards aren't up to par, about how to coach, counsel, and then ultimately discipline people when appropriate. And if you're appropriately coaching and counseling people, you usually never have to get to the level of discipline. And that's an art form in and of itself. And I think that's a whole separate episode to
yeah.
really
There's a
talk
bunch
about.
of stuff we could cover on that. And for anybody listening to this one who is interested in learning about that topic and how to deal with those challenges, the follow up, the sequel to this book, Extreme Ownership, by the same guys, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, is called "The Dichotomy of Leadership." They go into that issue in much more depth in that book. There's also another concept of basically the leadership without, I shouldn't say without discipline, but uh, disciplining people, or I should say correcting people without disciplining them, right? And there's a whole book on that. The name escapes me at the moment, but we can definitely cover that in another episode. And there's some interesting, innovative ideas there. And one company, for example, when they're dealing with a problem employee or somebody who perhaps made a mistake, they'll bring them in and discuss it and say, "Hey, we're going to give you some time off. It's paid time off. You're not suspended. You're not in trouble. We're going to have this conversation, and we're going to give you a day or two off. And hey, take that time for yourself and think about this. And how to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future. Um, and they'll do that up to 2 times, as long as it's not something, a major serious like safety issue. They'll do that up to 2 times. The third time, it's termination. But they saw tremendous results with this approach. They saw that people genuinely were making a real effort, and again, huge results. I don't want to take up too much time on that. I
But
agree with you.
it
That
ties
can be
right into
so
holding them
successful.
accountable and instilling that concept and the approach of extreme ownership for them as well. And part of what has to be done as a supervisor is recognizing that it's not these people are not reaching the performance standard, understanding if your message delivery of that standard was clear or not, and that's where you have to reflect on yourself. And when it is clear, now turning the script onto saying, is this person holding themselves accountable? If not, I'm going to hold them accountable, and having the ability, not only through your position, but through the relationship and how you're going to address those performance issues. When you address them early, and think about Derek Chauvin, was he ever held accountable for his use of force up until that point where he interacted with George Floyd? There's a lot of other factors that went into effect. However, no one on this side, the law enforcement side, feels that he was correct. But how could that have been prevented? Proper training, proper policy, and holding him accountable to that up until prior to that moment, because nobody just jumps to that level of extreme. And
Right.
addressing that early in their career is where we come in, and that's how you're able to prevent people that are that off of what our baseline has to be, right? And the
Yeah.
final point for this particular section, don't ask your leader what you should do. Tell them what you are going to do. They've said this
I
exact
love
point
this.
before. They've said it. We've talked about this exact point before. And that is, we talked about the critical shift. We talked about that pivotal moment. When you are at the point in your development to where you're now telling me as your leader what you're doing, I love it. That's what I want to see. That's
Yeah.
what I want to hear. And I could see that is going to grow your maturity. Once you have that shift in your mentality, you're going to grow exponentially from that moment. And also being able to have the wherewithal to say, maybe what I'm saying is not going to be the correct answer, or maybe it's going to be wrong, but I'm confident in my own ability, that I'm educated, I'm trained. This is what I think is the best. And I'll let my leader correct me when I need to be corrected. But
Right.
that is huge.
This this to me says a couple of things that I really like, and I think are really important. Um, Number one, you've said this before. Uh, Leadership is not just a noun; it's a verb, right?
Yep.
You want to be a leader, lead, do it. Also, you want your superiors to have confidence in you. Show up with confidence in yourself, right? By taking this approach, you're saying, "I understand the problem. I've I've analyzed it, I've researched it, whatever the situation calls for. I thoroughly understand what we're dealing with here, and I have come up with a solid plan of how we're going to address this, and here's how I'm going to execute it." Right? Like you said, if they take issue with anything, they can absolutely tweak it. They can give me that guidance, and I'll take that because I check my ego. I'll appreciate that feedback, right? But man, you're gonna really help them to be confident in you if instead of coming to them, what should I do, you come to them with that confidence. Hey boss, here's what I'm going to do. This is what we got. This is, I think this is going to be the right approach, and this is how we're going to do it. As a leader, like you said, if I had a subordinate coming to me with that attitude, and showing that he knows his shit. He's well prepared. I love it, and I'm gonna all day long. I'm gonna support that guy, that subordinate, to help them be successful. I love it. I'm gonna, hey man, go with it, run with it. Let me know what you need.
So my captain's currently in the West Point Leadership School, and he's
Yeah,
been doing a lot of work, and we've had some great conversations back and forth. And one of the things we were just talking about, one of the guys on my squad, he's kind of stale in the sense that he's reached a plateau in his career. So he does not have aspirations to get promoted right now. And that's where you have vertical growth within your organization. But there's a lot that we can do as superiors to expand horizontal growth, horizontal loading, and being able to come up with more work for them that's appropriate for their level, but it's not busy work. It's work that they're actually vested in. And how you get that is by having that conversation. But the more that you have these types of conversations of where you're proposing and showing them that you've thought beyond what is a normal level of thinking for the position that you're in, the more that you're going to get growth, the more likely you are to be thought about for the next project. And again, it's not something necessarily that you're going to get financially compensated for, but it's something that you're going to enjoy doing. And it's something different. It's something that'll help you with your development. And then when you do take vertical growth, you'll be so well developed at the level below you that the officers that are now below you, it's a lot easier for you to manage them because you're familiar with the work that they do. So looking at that as your own horizontal growth, but also pushing down to your subordinates, having them grow as much as they can within their position and what's appropriate for your department, and not being fearful in the sense of saying like, hey, I didn't get to go to narcotics training. Why does he get to go to narcotics training? Or I didn't
Right.
get to go on loan to the prosecutor's office. Why should I let him go on loan? Like, no, that's what being a leader is about. Check your own ego and let that officer grow. And I've talked about it in other episodes. I've talked about it in the classes that we teach. A lot of what we talk about here, we cover in our Command One, our frontline leadership. But check your own ego and develop your subordinates. Like, let your subordinates surpass you. Let your subordinates be better than you are. Because guess what? Their success is your success. And when you're succeeding and you're showing that you're able to think outside of the normal box and you're pushing that up the chain, your superiors are going to let you grow, let you become the best that you can in that position. And that's something that's
Yeah.
important, especially in this line of work where egos really do get in the way of that horizontal growth.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right, I
All
think
right.
we've
Uh,
well covered this section.
yep.
Any other final thoughts?
Now that's it for me.
All right, next episode we'll be picking up part three, decisiveness amid uncertainty. But thank you for joining us again. If this is something that you would like to have in-person conversation with us, again, our Command One, the frontline leadership class that we do is a week-long class that covers a lot of what we're talking about. We travel around the country, teach this class. I'll put a QR code up for that if it's something that you're interested. But thank you for joining us. Tune in next time. Stay safe.
Yep. Take care.
This podcast is brought to you by the J. Harris Academy of Police Training. J. Harris Academy of Police Training is based in New Jersey and provides law enforcement training services nationwide for promotional examinations, use of force, supervisory development, and other key areas within law enforcement. This podcast is utilized to discuss key topics occurring within the profession. The opinions and information provided is for entertainment purposes only. In an effort to provide this, we often purposely discuss opposite views and opinions to spark conversation and develop discussion points. The contents of the show and show notes are all copyrighted. All blog posts, podcasts, and show notes that are distributed to the public for free can be redistributed via hard copy or electronic copy for free only if the J. Harris Academy of Police Training is included as the acknowledged author within the actual media that is redistributed. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog. Under no circumstances shall the J. Harris Academy of Police Training, any guests, contributors to the podcast or blog, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the company be responsible for damages arising from the use of the information provided.